So, Sonic the Hedgehog's pretty cool, right? It honestly feels really surreal to finally be living in a reality where Sonic is a critically and financially successful franchise again. It's always been popular, but it feels like we're finally past the dark ages of the franchise. That's the most I can say about that, because if I hear the phrase Sonic had a rough transition to 3D one more time, I will be on the news. It feels pretty vindicating to have stuck with the franchise this whole time and finally see it get its act together, and to see millions of people realize in real time, wait, Sonic's kinda gas actually. I could do a whole video about the current Sonic renaissance, but I only have so much autism to spare today, so let's rewind the clock a bit to 2019. It's been 2 years since the release of Sonic Forces.
There's sand everywhere! Green Hill's looking a lot more like—
and everyone's feeling pretty down. There's not much hope going around, and the direction and future of the franchise seems incredibly uncertain. Then the first trailer for the Sonic movie dropped. Yet no, I'm not going to be the 10 millionth person to go on a long rant about the state of the original trailer, the original Sonic design. Hey guys, did you know at one point this film looked like shit? People still think this was some kind of publicity stunt, by the way, even though there was a ton of merch made of the original Sonic design, and they literally had to shut one of the studios down. Like, if this was a publicity stunt, I would not want to play poker with Jeff Fowler, because he is a more terrifying gambler than I could ever hope to be. But yeah, the Sonic redesign was more than essential if this movie was even going to stand a chance. And this one move garnered Jeff Fowler and Paramount a lot of respect, even though it was Paramount's fault to begin with. And with the movie eventually releasing to a modest but still surprising amount of praise and financial success, something in the timeline shifted. This movie was Sonic's first win as a franchise since Mania, and if you don't count that, and this was technically their only win since Generations released in 2011, dear god. And ever since this movie, Sonic has been taking W after W after W, not counting Colors Ultimate. I genuinely don't know what happened there. With the games being well received and selling better than ever, and most importantly for this video, the movie's becoming their own franchise, even though there are many parts of these films that make me confused, befuddled, and die of cringe, I have a lot of respect for them, and with the recent release of the third movie, and it not only being a great Sonic movie, but a great movie in general, I felt it was about time I finally gave this entire franchise the video it deserves. So yeah, I watched every Sonic the Hedgehog movie, and a Knuckles TV show, which I've actually warmed up to, believe it or not. Alright, let's get one thing out of the way. This is not a good Sonic movie. If you go into Sonic Movie 1 with the expectation that Jet the Hawk is gonna jump through the screen and kiss you on the mouth, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. The only reason this is called a Sonic movie is because Sonic is here and Jim Carrey is just playing some guy called Robotnik. When it comes to being a faithful adaptation, this is like the furthest you could possibly stray from the source material. And the bastard trailers really edge you with that beautiful CGI recreation of Green Hill, only for it to show up for like 2 minutes in the film itself before going, "F you bitch, you're going to Montana." There are some cute references here and there. The crazy old guy pulls out a picture of Sonic, which was kind of funny, but for the most part you are just getting a substantially better version of Hop, except it's Sonic in the passenger seat with James Marsden and not Hop, whatever his name is. So yeah, it's not a very good Sonic movie, but as a buddy cop road trip movie starring Sonic the Hedgehog, it is kinda fun. I'm obviously a bit disappointed that this is Hollywood's first attempt at a Sonic movie, and it ended up being a live-action hybrid. Sonic can pretty much work in any setting you drop him into, but live action was always going to be dicey. If I had the ability to turn back time to go to that boardroom meeting and tell them to make an animated Sonic movie instead, even considering the heights these movies have reached since then, I genuinely would do it in a heartbeat. And I'll always be a little depressed looking at how good the Mario movie was at being faithful to the source material, and wondering why we couldn't have just gotten that but with Sonic. And the quality scale for animated Sonic media, much like the games, looks exactly like a f***ing roller coaster. I'm just starved of good animated Sonic content, bro. Why is Sonic Boom the best one out of all of these? Though to be fair, even though we're living in an era where video game adaptations are becoming far less scared of embracing the fact that they're video game adaptations, I think the line of actually a good movie to faithful adaptation is getting blurrier. Sonic Movie 1 may not be a super faithful adaptation, nor does it set out to be one, but as a by-the-numbers kids movie, it's actually pretty solid. It's not gonna knock anyone off their seats or anything, but it tells a simple and entertaining story that, despite the cliches, actually feels somewhat sincere. As much as the Mario movie is breathtaking to look at and manages to stay true to the source material, the main critique constantly levied at it is that it doesn't really have much of a story. People try defending this by going, "Oh, it's Mario, he goes bing bing wahoo and collects the coins." Like, yeah, I get that, no one's asking Mario to be the f***ing godfather, but there's no reason why there couldn't have been more of a story here, even if it's simple. Like, there are literally Mario games that have more of a story than the Mario movie does. There's more substance to Rosalina's backstory in Galaxy than there is throughout this movie movie's entire runtime. What you want to do is strike that balance between having a good story and being faithful at the same time, and it's not a hard thing to do. As simple as Sonic Movie 1's story is, I genuinely think it's a solid 6 out of 10 film that takes its simple and cliche plot and story beats and just executes them to the point that it isn't painful to watch. Naturally, because this movie is more geared towards general audiences and kids than Sonic fans and kids, it has its moments of being lowbrow. Why did I need to see Sonic farting? Do you even comprehend what the f you've just done? But if you can look past that, the movie really isn't that bad. The whole plot revolving around found family and Sonic being adopted by Tom and Maddie, the two main human characters, does feel pretty weird if you're a long-time fan, but I've long since made peace with the fact that these movies are kind of their own thing. And as long as they do it well, I really don't mind it too much. This isn't the Yakuza Amazon show scenario where they have Kiryu audibly say he wants to become the Dragon of Dojima. Like, no, you fuckers, that's not what— Speaking of Sonic himself, a lot of people are split on his characterization in this movie, and it's pretty easy to see why. Up until the 2010s, Sonic's characterization was pretty consistent. Sure, he was the cool, confident hero who saved the day and cracked a few jokes here and there, but he was also surprisingly laid back and gentle despite being the personification of the era he was created in. A force of nature, a free spirit who had an ego and an attitude, but never believed his own hype to an obnoxious extent, so to speak. And what made him such a cool character was his complete devotion to fighting for what he believes in and not what's typically considered right or wrong. He's not a complex character or anything, but no matter how bad the story writing of the games would be, he would usually be the one and only consistent thing about them. Then the 2010s came around and it was just a straight decade of
baldy nose hair! I don't like what you're doing to my friends in there.
Shut up.
It's messed up. So I'm gonna mess you up.
I know everyone rags on how atrocious the writing of the 2010s games are, so I'll keep this brief, but it can't be denied that a big reason why Sonic fans are so hyper-defensive and sensitive about Sonic's writing and characterization these days is because the 2010s games took this simple but effective character and basically turned him into a parody of himself, believing his own hype and referring to himself as a hero, constantly making unfunny quips. Yeah, he still fights for what he believes in, but he feels like so much more of a goody two-shoes and an annoying prick on top of that. In fact, it wasn't until some of the recent issues of the IDW comics that we got to see Sonic put in a morally dubious situation again where he's doing what he thinks is right. Sonic and his friend's characterization is definitely being handled a lot better nowadays, but no matter how much I appreciate Ian Flynn and his work, the characters still feel a little off at times. Oh yeah, I was talking about the Sonic movie, my bad. So I think with all that said, you have a good idea of why Sonic's characterization in this movie would be such a big topic of debate, because it's a pretty extreme departure. I think movie Sonic does have a mentality and attitude that's more in line with how Sonic was in the Adventure games, but that's pretty much the only similarity here. He's fast, he wisecracks, and he's definitely cocky, but because the movies aren't tied to the canon of the games, and also because evidently the alien buddy cop road trip angle for this movie is a little misguided, they give Sonic a backstory and a character arc and more noticeable flaws that sort of make him the antithesis to how Sonic is meant to be written in the games. He doesn't experience any character development because as a character he exists to inspire change in others. It's what makes him such a cool static character. I'm not against having scenarios where Sonic and his convictions are challenged, but movie Sonic is a pretty big deviation. And you know what? I kind of like him a bit. Again, I've made peace with the fact that these movies are not 100% accurate, and since the rest of the film is mostly solid, I don't mind it this is a different take on Sonic. I think he's kinda charming, even if he can sometimes be a little overbearing with all the pop culture references. This is also something movie Sonic gets criticized for, constantly quipping with a bunch of pop culture references that aren't really that funny. While it is explained in universe since Sonic spent a lot of time on Earth reading comics and watching movies, it's still just an excuse to substitute actual funny dialogue for a lame pop culture joke that doesn't land. But beyond all that, I do appreciate that they tried giving this version of Sonic some depth. His adoptive mother Longclaw is more of a plot device and is only given any actual importance in the next two films, but I don't mind her inclusion too much.
She was basically Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Okay, don't push it. Oh yeah, Jim Carrey plays Robotnik in this movie, and this is probably one of the greatest mixed bags of a casting choice I've ever seen. On the one hand, it's Jim Carrey, and he brings a lot of much needed humor and energy to this movie. On the other, I think people mostly accepted Jim Carrey's Robotnik off of the idea that Robotnik / Eggman is a crazy evil scientist, which, yeah, he is to an extent, but while I enjoy Jim Carrey in these movies, I think this version of Eggman misses the fact that he's supposed to be a balance between goofy and menacing. Sonic Adventure 2 is definitely an example of a more serious Eggman. I mean, he was just locked in throughout that entire story, but my point is that a big part of what makes Eggman work as a villain is that he's funny and genuinely threatening. I mean, if you've seen Eggman in the comics, one issue he's talking about his love of theme parks, and the next he's holding a gun to Tangle's head and throwing hands at these 3-foot animals. While I like this version of Eggman and I think he works for these movies, I think at least a couple of scenes where he locks in would have been great, and it's not like Jim Carrey's exclusively a comedic actor. His chemistry with Agent Stone, though, is fantastic. In fact, Stone is just a great character and probably one of the best parts of these movies. I just don't have too much to say about it other than Lee Majdoub definitely ships it.
I don't know, you know, old man Yowie's cool sometimes too, I guess.
Toxic Yowie's the shit.
Other than that, the CG, while dodgy in places, does look pretty decent overall, with Sonic specifically being a highlight, and the few action scenes that are here are pretty fun. Sonic Movie 1 is definitely a pretty lacking video game adaptation and doesn't do much to justify why it's a movie about Sonic the Hedgehog and not whatever other glub shitto CGI character they could have thrown in here without much of a change to the plot, but as its own film, it's alright. There are definitely far worse family films you could spend an afternoon watching, and definitely far worse video game adaptations, but in 2020, just when you thought the movie was over and thought, wow, thank God that wasn't a disaster, you get hit with this. And just like that, it became clear to everyone once the money started rolling in that these movies were only getting started. Also, Wade is here. Hi Wade, we'll talk about your show later.
Return to sender.
I'm actually really impressed with how quick these movies come out without there being some kind of unhealthy crunching pipeline, like how Marvel handles their films nowadays. Like, yeah, this movie didn't have the smoothest production due to the pandemic, but still. Especially since they have really impressive CGI compared to films that cost over $100 million more to make. But anyway, Sonic Movie 2 in my eyes is a substantial step up compared to the first movie, to the point where I generally feel comfortable calling it a good movie, and not a half-bad Sonic movie, honestly. It still falls into plenty of the same traps the first movie did, and also has plenty of kids movie cliches. I still don't understand why the scene of Sonic and Tails dancing to Uptown Funk was so long, but it certainly explains why the movie's runtime is so inflated.
New DJ coming in. What's with this home?
But the movie looks to directly address many of the critiques levied against the first movie, such as the lack of elements from the actual games, lack of characters from the actual games outside of Sonic, and considerably toning down a number of scenes involving humans, though the movie still has plenty of those, and yes, we'll get to the wedding scene soon. So, as I said a second ago, this movie includes way more things from the games into its plot, not just with the introduction of both Tails and Knuckles, but also with the introduction of the Master Emerald, as well as far more blatant references to the games from specific set pieces, background gags, etc. And while it still comes off as Paramount begrudgingly letting the Sonic movies be more video gamey in response to backlash, their actual implementation, while different, is definitely not as half-assed as you'd expect. First of all, Tails and Knuckles. It's great to see these two on the big screen like this, though Tails' characterization leaves a lot to be desired. I make plenty of excuses for how Sonic is written in these films, but Tails being this hardcore Sonic fanboy who at quite literally every turn is just glazing the absolute f*** out of him is something I really don't vibe with. Tails has always looked up to Sonic, but taking it to the level of him being an obsessive fanboy feels like an insane overcorrection for the sake of being different to the games, and I don't like it. Especially since beyond spending the entire movie doing tricks on it, they do next to nothing useful throughout the whole movie besides a couple of scenes, and even then he is just spouting unfathomable glaze. There is going to be a worldwide honey shortage from the amount of glaze being poured over Sonic by this goddamn fox, and I really wish he had something else to do beyond standing around and being adorable, especially since the marketing for this film as well as the logo treat his inclusion as a pretty big deal. The only positive thing I have to say about Tails here is that he's voiced by Colleen O'Shaughnessy, who's been voicing Tails in the game since 2014. Now, I don't mind the celebrity voice actors in this franchise, given the performances are pretty solid across the board, but it is immensely refreshing to see a VA from the actual video games reprise a role for the movie adaptation, and despite the terrible dialogue, she sounds fantastic here. But while I may be disappointed over Tails' inclusion and how they're written, I just cannot say the same thing about Knuckles. Holy shit, this is genuinely the best that Knuckles has been written in the entire Sonic franchise since the mid-2000s. In fact, I go as far as saying this genuinely might be my favorite version of Knuckles ever. Knuckles, much like Sonic, was also a victim of the 2010s writing and was sort of treated like a joke. This was also not helped by how he was written in Sonic Boom and a TV show. Even though Knuckles in the TV show is very funny and well written with the context that Sonic Boom is supposed to be a parody, the 3-year gap between Boom and Forces was pretty much filled with Knuckles being a complete numbskull, and then Forces came around, and while he wasn't nearly as egregiously stupid there, he made an insane amount of stupid, poor decisions in that game, and would often spout the stupidest plans you've ever heard while unironically framing them as good ideas. Sonic Movie 2 is the first time in nearly a decade that Knuckles has been written with any amount of respect. He's strong, a force to be reckoned with, loyal to a fault, and actually allowed to be cool. He's still naive and has plenty of moments that are played for laughs, but they're a result of him being a fish out of water rather than being rock bottom stupid, which is how it always should be. And to top it off, while I am disappointed they managed to get Colleen to voice Tails but couldn't get Dan Green, Travis Willingham, or Dave B. Mitchell to voice Knuckles, they got f***ing Idris Elba to voice him, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the voice I now hear Knuckles speak in whenever I picture him in my head.
Do I look like I need your power?
Oh, it's everywhere. I'm not against celebrity voice acting so long as the actors themselves are acting and not phoning it in. And Idris just sounds fantastic as Knuckles and clearly seems to be enjoying voicing him. I mean, bro is wearing Knuckles gloves in the recording booth for Sonic 3, I think he might just be a little bit fond of this role. This movie does Knuckles so much justice after 8 years of haha, Knuckles is a dumbass, and it makes me very happy, especially since this movie was released the same year as Sonic Frontiers, the first game in the franchise to take Knuckles seriously since forever. Knuckles is super well written in this movie, and I go as far as saying he's the best part about it. The actual film ditches the buddy cop road trip shit from the first movie, and it feels like an actual adventure, as Sonic and Tails try to find a Master Emerald before Knuckles and Eggman do. This movie has a lot more action than the previous one, and all of the action scenes are pretty good. Visually, the movie is also a pretty big step up from the first, though to be fair, it's not like the first movie had nearly as much CGI as this one. Also, to be fair, I'm not too sure what was up with the color grading of this movie. I am aware that the production of this movie did suffer due to the pandemic, but I don't think that's enough to explain why the coloring of many scenes looks so grey and bland. There's a complete lack of contrast here. The first movie had way more vibrant colors than this. I'm obviously not a VFX expert, but even when I was watching this in cinemas, I was frequently put off by how bland the color grading was. It really drains the life out of most of the scenes in this movie. Overall, while I found the film far more entertaining and exciting than the first, it does still have some really annoying problems that I wish they addressed. Again, I'm aware that the pandemic resulted in some parts of the movie being a little rushed, but I think these are still worth noting. Firstly, why the hell is this movie 2 hours long? Despite being more exciting than the first, movie 2 has substantially slower pacing. It really takes its time getting to places, which I can respect to an extent. After all, I'd much prefer a film that actually takes its time rather than rushing everything out the door half-baked. But there are multiple scenes throughout the movie that could have absolutely been edited down or just cut out entirely, and it would have made the film feel so much better. The majority of the second act of this film, while having its highlights, just drags its feet to an excruciating pace. Again, they have a 4 to 5 minute scene in a bar where Sonic and Tails dance to Uptown Funk. Like, surely there could have been a more efficient and less facepalm worthy way to have Sonic and Tails bond a bit, right? And it also could have just been shorter. No, I don't care that Sonic does the Sonic Adventure pose here. This movie should actually, that's a lie, I saw it parked in the theater. But why is this scene so long? And then there's the f***ing wedding scene, which feels like it was ripped straight out of a Tyler Perry movie, except it's actually kind of amusing, until you realize, oh my god, this scene is still going? I think people tend to be overdramatic about this scene. It's not badly written, it's just completely out of place and it takes forever to finish. Just 10 minutes of this mildly funny wedding scene, and it almost makes you forget you're watching a Sonic the Hedgehog movie. I don't care that the scene itself isn't bad. You could generally either trim it down or cut the entire thing out and nothing substantial about the movie would change. The priest shamefully revealing he has a taser on him was funny though, I'll give you that. Generally speaking, even though there are far less human antics in this movie than the first, the parts they do take up are so inconvenient to the film's pacing and an utter slog to get through that I'm not entirely surprised many people came out this film resenting them entirely. Like, I find Wade funny enough, but by the third act I was just so tired of the human stuff I just stopped engaging with whatever joke he was trying to tell. I might also get cooked for this, but unlike the first movie, I found Jim Carrey to be bordering on insufferable in this one. He still brings a lot of energy and has some funny moments, but there were multiple points in this movie where I genuinely just wanted him to shut up. And it's weird because even though in the next movie there's literally 2 of him, I found him to be at his funniest there. There's just something about his dialogue and zaniness in movie 2 that just irritates me, and I genuinely don't know what it is. So please don't consider this a serious critique, this is entirely a personal grievance. As for my problems with this movie, that's where I run out of negative things to say. And to be honest, a big reason why I think this movie deserves a 7 out of 10 from me is because the third act greatly picks up the slack and delivers a fun and satisfying climax. Sonic and Knuckles talking about their shared pain of losing a loved one was a great way to round out both of their arcs in this movie, and the fight against the Death Egg robot was pretty fun. But then the movie suddenly drinks all of mankind's known and available sauce, because at the very end of the fight we get fucking Super Sonic. When they bring up the Chaos Emeralds earlier in the film, it was probably natural to assume that Super Sonic would be a safe bet, but given the previous movie's refusal to incorporate many aspects from the games, this completely caught me off guard. And even though it's a brief scene, it's incredibly cool to see Super Sonic on the big screen and bear witness to the most justified moment of aura farming in the entire movie. While I'm still iffy about the film ending with Tom and Maddie adopting Tails and Knuckles, even though it is thematically satisfying, the third act of movie 2 is a blast, and I just wish that the rest of the movie measured up to how good it was. But with that said, this is still a dramatic improvement over the first movie, and shows that Jeff Fowler and the team are definitely listening to feedback and tailoring these movies more towards Sonic fans while keeping the appeal for general audiences. And while this is certainly not a perfect balance, all things considered, I was still very happy with how Sonic Movie 2 turned out. If there's one thing I definitely wanted in this movie though, it would be including actual music from the games. Yes, we're about to have this conversation now, so buckle up. This was also a problem with the first movie, but since a lot about how movie 1 was written and directed was misguided, I could at least excuse it. Movie 2 though, there's no excuse here. This soundtrack is lame. The only thing the Mario movies will always have over the Sonic movies outside of their visual faithfulness to the source material is that the entire soundtrack includes references, leitmotifs, and straight up rips of popular and beloved music from the Mario franchise. And they all work great and don't sound out of place in the slightest. nicest. Now, I don't think I need to be the one to say it, but if there's one thing that literally everyone agrees on when it comes to Sonic, it's that no matter the quality of the game, it's a safe bet that the music is going to be fantastic. Unless you're Sonic Chronicles, which... Help! There are very few video game franchises with as many iconic songs as Sonic the Hedgehog. The franchise has an incredibly rich musical history, from the original Genesis compositions, to the butt rock, ska, jazz, and rap featured in the adventure games, to the sheer variety of genres covered in the modern games. The most that the movies have provided so far when it comes to musical references is a short piano rendition of Green Hill Zone, and that's it. I can't even say it's better than nothing because it's just lazy. The whole soundtrack is lazy. Not just because it's comprised of mostly generic superhero orchestra music that doesn't even come close to sounding like it's from a Sonic game, it's just lazy. Like, during the Sonic and Knuckles fight scene, they sample a track from Ant-Man. Ant-Man. Fucking Ant-Man. What can you even say to this? This is the cinematic equivalent of stealing from Burger King. Even if they just had some orchestral renditions of the Genesis themes, I'd be happy. But there's not a single notable song here, and the best song from the soundtrack is taken from Marvel. Is this not insane? I'm gonna lose my mind. Speaking of losing my mind, Shadow, it's Shadow. Shut up, child. The idea of a feature-length adaptation of Sonic Adventure 2 was insane to me. Anyway, Sonic 2 is a good movie, but from the ashes of the torn-apart human scenes rose one sole survivor, and his name would go down in history because this franchise needs a hero.
The flames of disaster! The flames of disaster! The flames of disaster!
When it was announced that Knuckles would be receiving his own spin-off show on Paramount Plus, a lot of people were pretty excited. It was very clear from Sonic 2 that they were trying to incorporate more aspects from the games into the movieverse, and Sonic 2 already gave us glimpses of Knuckles' past and backstory of the Echidna tribe, topped off with the fact that this is the most enjoyable Knuckles it's been in years, and there are plenty of reasons to be excited. However, a few people were quick to catch on to the fact that having a fully CGI character as detailed as Knuckles be the protagonist of a relatively low-budget streaming series on Paramount Plus sounded too good to be true, and it was assumed that there would at least be a decent bit of human shenanigans in order to balance things out and reduce costs. I wasn't really against this. I was able to stomach the human stuff from the last two movies, but then when more details about the series came out and made it clear that Wade Whipple, the comic relief side character of the past two movies, was going to have an integral role, a lot of people were concerned that Knuckles was going to get completely overshadowed in his own series. Then this series came out, and to this day, I don't think there's been a single Sonic-related product that has had this much of a completely divided reaction. Not even some of the more mixed reviewed games in the franchise caused reactions that were as visceral as this, and admittedly, I was one of these people at first. I like to think I'm pretty chilled out when it comes to discussing things I like and dislike these days, but I was just completely baffled by Knuckles at first. Pretty infamously, I left a review of the series on Letterboxd with half a star, saying I would rather run through Westopolis and Shadow the Hedgehog an additional 10 times and watch this again, which, yeah, it's a pretty strong selection of words to say about something you dislike, I think, but now it's been nearly 10 months since Knuckles came out, and since my initial impression, I've rewatched the show 2 more times in an attempt to see what a lot of other people see here, because while the series did generate a massive wave of confused and negative reactions, it also had just as many people defending it and saying it was actually kinda good, and honestly, after rewatching it for this video, I think I get it. Granted, I still don't think this is a good Sonic or Knuckles series at all because it's just not about either of them. This is a show about Wade Whipple of Knuckles as a supporting character, which is extremely odd. I know they couldn't use Knuckles that much due to how expensive the CGI is, as well as being able to afford Idris Elba to come back and voice him, but when your title protagonist only has 76 minutes of screen time, significantly less than half the runtime of the whole show, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the marketing was just a little misleading. But hear me out here. Once I got over the initial shock of Knuckles taking a back seat in his own series, I started to enjoy myself a lot more. As much as it still confuses me, I find Wade to be a very charming, funny, and likable character, and I can't deny that as a series focusing on him and his struggles, it's shockingly decent. The show feels much more like a live-action cartoon than the movies did, which I think is a great compromise for the series being a live-action hybrid. Sonic and his friends thrive in a more cartoony and less realistic world, and they use this approach to tell their story in the silliest, most batshit insane way you can think of.
Let's do it, man.
I'm actually...
The Knuckles show genuinely feels like high-budget shitposting, and that might be why I like it so much now. The show just doesn't take itself seriously at all, and it instantly makes it the funniest thing to come out of this franchise so far. The rock opera scene in general is just so earnestly silly and self-aware. I don't think I could hate it if I tried. There is an actual plot here with Wade reuniting with his father, as well as all the bowling stuff, but genuinely I wasn't invested. I just found this series really entertaining as a stupid comedy. There are some villains here who all suck. They forgot to give this guy a name throughout the whole show, so they had to quickly think of one to put on the poster. Pachacamac from Sonic Adventure is here, and is just blatantly not the same character. I didn't really know how to feel about this, given he's an integral part of Sonic Adventure's story and the history of the Echidna tribe, but then I remembered I was watching the Wade Whipple show and stopped giving a There's this whole thing in episode 3 where Knuckles tells Wade's family that he's the last of his tribe, and because Wade's family is Jewish, they tell him that their tribe has been through some tough times too, in relation to the fucking Holocaust. Would you believe me if I told you this wasn't the first time a Sonic property referenced the Holocaust? Wade's sister Wanda is really insufferable, actually. Like, legitimately, they might be the worst Sonic character across Sonic anything. Like, even her character poster gives off rancid vibes. She's super annoying. Oh yeah, and then there's the Flames of Disaster. I don't know what made the people behind the show decide that they were going to pull 2 plot points from Sonic 06 of all games and then throw them into the Knuckles show. Like, they straight up just show Iblis, and I can't tell if them canonically fighting Knuckles instead of Silver is a promotion or not. And the Flames of Disaster is just some new power that Knuckles unlocks, and not the literal end of humanity. All in all, Knuckles is just dumb fun at the end of the day. If you need to watch something that's short and doesn't take itself seriously, then you could probably spend an evening watching this in full and feel satisfied. I still think it's a pretty bad Knuckles show, but when analyzing what it's actually trying to be, I had some fun with it. Now, onto what a lot of you probably clicked on this video for. And here we are with the most recent film in the franchise. I know that these movies are selectively taking whatever elements they want from the games, but going from an adaptation that was a mix of Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 straight to Sonic Adventure 2 is still insane to me. But I cannot deny that even knowing all the flaws and traps these movies fall into, I was hyped for this movie from the moment I saw Shadow in the post-credits of the last one. Sonic Adventure 2, for all its flaws, glitches, jank, and dated presentation, is one of my favorite games of all time. And while the story has plenty of holes and contrivances, it still stands as one of the greatest stories told in a Sonic game, and one of my favorite video game stories ever. Like, yeah, move aside God of War, we have fancy cinematics, incredible performances, and soul-crushing emotional payoffs. This shit is just iconic. SA2's story, to me, is what every Sonic story should strive to be. Fun, adventurous, a little bit cheesy, while still managing to balance its darker elements without completely obliterating the tone. Adventure 2 gets really dark towards the end, yes, but it feels like a natural progression as the stakes continue to rise. And the climax of this game is one of the most iconic and legendary in video game history for a reason. Live and Learn by Crush 40 single-handedly shaped my taste in music as a kid, and I am not kidding. And at the center of it all is Shadow the Hedgehog, who after years of being the poster boy for try-hard edgy after a string of painful missteps on Sega and Sonic Team's part when it came to his characterization, after years of being mocked for being something he wasn't, a one-dimensional edgelord trying too hard to be cool, everyone has just kinda accepted that, yeah, this guy's kinda cool actually. I promise that's my last AMV, I'm so sorry. Shadow and his tragic backstory with Maria are vitally important to SA2, and the one thing I was mainly worried about when it came to Sonic 3 was, well, the possibility that this backstory gets butchered or changed into something it isn't. I mean, it was always going to be a stretch that a series of films mostly aimed at general audiences and families would feature a scene where a little girl gets gunned down by the military. Hell, it was ballsy for it to even be part of Adventure 2's story to begin with, given kids are the target demographic for Sonic games. But unlike all the other changes made to the characters that I can mostly look past and stomach, Shadow and his backstory being dramatically changed was not something I would ever be able to overlook as easily. Anyway, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is the best video game movie ever made. How? Genuinely, how did this movie turn out this great? I have no words. Actually, I have plenty of them, but you know what I mean. Even as someone who likes these movies, I did not expect them to lock the f*** in for Sonic 3 this hard. It truly feels like everything we have seen previously from this franchise was just a warm-up. All of it finally building up to this. Even though my ideal Sonic movie is still an animated one, this is probably the best Sonic movie we're ever going to get for a long time. And it is completely fine with me because, oh my god. First things first, this is not a straightforward adaptation of SA2's plot. It has plenty of the same plot points, plenty of references, and of course has Shadow, Maria, and Gerald Robotnik, but it's also very much its own thing. It uses the plot of SA2 as a baseline to do its own thing while still paying homage to and respecting the story and characters of SA2, except Gerald, but we'll get to him. Firstly, Shadow. Oh my god, Shadow is perfect in this movie. Well, I do think he needed a bit more screen time, so we got less of, well, less of this. Shadow is one of the best parts of the film. He is blatantly aura farming like no tomorrow in every single scene, and you know what? Pop off, King, you deserve it. It's probably worth mentioning that Shadow is kind of Jeff Fowler's baby. One of his first jobs in the industry was actually working on the cinematics for Shadow's own game, which were coincidentally the best part of that game, and you can really tell they wanted to make Shadow the coolest guy ever, even though he's comically overpowered. Like, he does the Akira slide up a tower into the f***ing air. I can't even say he's doing too much, because literally, who does that? His dialogue is great, he's never trying too hard to be cool or edgy, which is how he's supposed to be portrayed in my eyes. I saw some people complaining about him going,
Revenge guac.
but it's like one of two lines of his in the movie that's meant to be funny, so I'll give it a pass. And then there's his backstory with Maria, and I might get some pushback here, but honestly, movie Shadow's backstory and the movie version of Maria absolutely annihilate the game version. I love Shadow Maria's backstory in the games, but I just can't deny that the movie does a much better job showing them actually bonding together. In the games, they don't really show you much of Shadow Maria besides the moment where Gunn kills her in front of Shadow's eyes. It's obviously tragic and does enough to get you to care, but the movie puts so much work into making Shadow and Maria actually feel like best friends slash siblings. Maria actually has a fun, energetic personality here. Again, I like Maria in the games, but if someone said to me that she was more of a plot device than a character, I'd have to concede and agree with them there. This montage doesn't last very long, but it and the following stargazing scene did such a good job of getting me emotionally invested, especially because I think Keanu Reeves is a great fit for Shadow and really sells his emotions despite the low tone of voice. I was initially a bit skeptical about Keanu voicing Shadow because while everyone loves him for being a great guy and a total goofball, he's never been that great of an actor. He can do a solid job, but in every movie or anything that he's in, he'll have at least 5 or 6 line reads that feel really off. Like, I loved him as Johnny Silverhand in Cyberpunk and I think it's overall a decent performance, but there's a lot of lines in that game where he probably should have been given an extra take or two.
Are you still rolling?
Then right before the movie came out, there was a DLC level for Sonic X Shadow Generations to promote the movie where Keanu voices Shadow for that one stage. Even though I think it's cool they got Keanu f***ing Reeves in the official Sonic game, he sounds really bad.
A beautiful city. It looks like how Maria described the Earth.
I can't tell if he was just phoning it in because he barely had much dialogue to voice for it, or if it was just a consequence of a B-list actor having to deal with Sonic voice direction for the first time.
Whatever.
What? Why did she say it like that? Keanu thankfully sounds pretty good in this movie though. He apparently did a bunch of research about Shadow before stepping into the booth, which I think is really cool. And it shows because while he obviously has a couple of lines where he's giving John Wick, "I'm going to need a gun," I can tell he's not just trying to phone it in. Maybe some of his lines could have done with a little more emotion, but for the most part I think he's a great fit for Shadow. By the way, my comment about the montage doing a good job of getting me emotionally invested is another thing this movie does so much better than the previous two. Sonic 3, just by taking inspiration from Adventure 2, has a lot of darker elements, and overall feels like a more mature movie than its predecessors while still being funny and goofy. Now it doesn't balance its tone nearly as well as Adventure 2, there are some moments of tonal whiplash here and there, but this is the first movie in this franchise that I can genuinely say had me invested from beginning to end. Like the scene where Shadow almost kills Tom actually made me feel kinda bad for Sonic, and not because I thought they were gonna have the balls to kill off Tom, of course not, they wouldn't do that, but the movie actually has moments where it takes itself seriously for more than 2 minutes. Now outside of Shadow, I can say with confidence that Sonic and Tails' characterization is a massive step up from previously. Knuckles is just kinda the same as he was in 2 in the Paramount Plus show, only a tad goofier, which I don't mind too much, but Tails actually feels like Tails now. They completely dropped the obsessive fanboy stuff from 2, and now he talks and acts like how Tails does in the games. Not to mention he actually does things in this movie and has an important role in the story. Then we get to Sonic, who is still far away from being close to how he is in the games, but this is definitely the best he has ever been in these movies. The pop culture references are still here and he has some odd lines of dialogue, but they're significantly toned down, and around the midpoint of the film and especially the third act he completely locks in. Still not perfect by any means, and it's a shame that every character they've introduced from the games has done moderate justice except Sonic himself, but I really like them in this movie. Then we get to Robotnik and Gerald Robotnik, both of whom are played by Jim Carrey. I think having both characters be played by Carrey is admittedly a stroke of genius, not just for creating some good comedy but also for the film's marketing. And my reservations about how Gerald is written aside, I can't deny that Carrey is the funniest part of the movie here, and this is easily his best performance in any of these movies. I wasn't nearly as irritated by him as I was in the second movie, and the only times where I thought the Robotniks overstayed their welcome was during the film's climax. Robotnik himself is also at his best as an actual character here, finally having a family member he can love and connect to, and when he gets betrayed and Gerald hits him with,
Oh, Ivo, you're no Maria.
like, damn. Damn! And while I haven't brought him up much in this video, seeing him finally admit that Agent Stone was the only person who cared about him while he sacrifices himself at the end was surprisingly touching. Now for Gerald. I don't know how to feel about this version of Gerald because he's just blatantly not the same character. In Adventure 2, Gerald was a posthumous twist villain. After Gunn raided the Ark and killed Maria, he was driven insane and was bent on avenging her, reprogramming the Ark to be sent on a collision course towards the Earth once all 7 Chaos Emeralds were collected, and was also able to reprogram Shadow's mind and alter his memories to have him be bent on revenge too in order to complete his plan. He outlined all of this in his journal and on tape before he was then executed by Gunn's firing squad, yet Adventure 2 was kind of f***ed up at times. In Sonic 3, Gerald is not only a much sillier character and only has one scene where he comes close to reaching the level of Game Gerald, but he's also alive! He's actually here, 110 years old. It's implied that he kept himself alive all this time by consuming the chaos energy from one of Shadow's quills, and I think that was supposed to be the intent, but it's not explained too well in the movie itself. Either way, this was such a crazy creative choice that a lot of people theorized that Gerald's presence was just Robotnik hallucinating, and I don't really blame them for thinking that. I think out of every character from the games, Gerald is easily given the worst treatment because while I definitely find him funny and I like the one scene where he gets serious and his reaction to Maria's death, he's such an insane departure from how he's written in the games that I don't really think I respect it as a creative choice. I mean, Sonic X Shadow Generations was released in 2024 in order to coincide with the movie. After all, 2024 was the year of Shadow, and Sega and Sonic Team did a good job at reintroducing Shadow and his backstory to new fans of the series. Imagine being a new fan, seeing Gerald act like a clown for the entirety of Sonic 3, then trying out your first Sonic game by playing Shadow Generations and seeing this.
I made a Faustian deal with that monster to create Shadow. Now it seems that we all have to pay for my sins.
Tonal Whiplash doesn't even begin to cover it. Still though, at least we got this line.
I know, grandson. A woman in the military.
Anyway, let's talk about the visuals and action of this movie for a second because I'm still blown away at how insanely good this movie looks. Sonic 3 has a budget of around $120 million, far less than the average MCU movie and Hollywood blockbuster, and yet this is some of the best CGI I have seen in years. It is a massive step up from the previous 2 films, especially when it comes to the color grading. The movie is so much more vibrant, there's so much more going on visually. Shadow specifically looks amazing, the cinematography is good, and these action scenes, bro, dear god. Sonic 3 is constant action, never to a mindless extent, but there's always something going on, and by the way, Kevin Molina Ortiz worked on this movie as a storyboard artist. They're best known for their work on Rise of the TMNT, one of the best looking cartoons of the last decade. They also worked on the Dark Beginning shorts for Shadow Generations, which also look fantastic, and it really shows. The action in this movie is so much more dynamic and bombastic than in Sonic 1 and 2, especially the fight between Sonic and Shadow in their super forms. This is literally just Dragon Ball. Sonic the Hedgehog is a better Dragon Ball movie than the actual Dragon Ball movie. I guess I should finally talk about the movie's climax now. Peak fiction. Sonic and Shadow's fight ends with Sonic stopping himself before he can deliver the final blow, and while it's cliche, I still think it gets its point across just fine, and even though Sonic and Shadow talking about loss is kind of a repeat of the scene with him and Knuckles in movie 2, Shadow and Maria are done so much justice in this movie and given a ton of focus, so it works a lot better in my eyes. The only thing I wish was better about this scene was the pacing. Sonic 3, unlike Sonic 2, is a super fast-paced movie. It is constantly moving from scene to scene, not to the point that I think the story is rushed, but I do think they could have spent a little more time on some scenes to really let them sink in. Sonic and Shadow talk for about a minute and it's a fantastic scene, but it goes by so quickly that Shadow's turnaround from being bent on vengeance to acknowledging that all of this is his fault loses a lot of the impact that I think it absolutely should have. Either way, the scene is great and it's immediately followed up by "Live and learn, motherfucker!" Another side tangent, sorry, but Sonic 3's soundtrack is a monumental step up compared to the previous 2 movies. While it still has a lot of generic orchestra stuff, there's a lot more variety with synths, guitars, and most importantly of all, actual music from the games. There still aren't nearly as many songs as I'd like here, and some of the references are a little hard to notice, like, yeah cool, you used the City Escape motif for a few seconds, great job man, but there's far more effort placed into this soundtrack. I mean, all the track names are named after quotes and scenes from Sonic Adventure 2, which I thought was pretty cool, and then we have Live and Learn. You cannot adapt Adventure 2 in any capacity without using this song at least once. The English dub of Sonic X got rid of it and the scene felt like ass because of it, and thankfully Live and Learn is used all throughout the movie as a leitmotif, much like how it's used throughout Sonic Adventure 2's soundtrack. You hear it everywhere, from Maria's acoustic version at the start of the movie, when Shadow breaks out of Prison Island, when Shadow beats up Knuckles, Super Sonic vs. Super Shadow, you can hear the guitar riff in the background on loop. It's kinda used as Shadow's theme throughout the movie, eventually culminating in Sonic and Shadow doing the hardest dap up I've ever seen as the real song plays and Johnny Giueli's vocals kick you in the goddamn throat. This was an out-of-body experience. I have loved this song for pretty much my entire life. Finally hearing it blast throughout the theater as Sonic and Shadow race towards the Eclipse cannon, it's cinema. It's f***ing cinema. And while I would have liked to hear more of the lyrics, the fact they played the song a second time while Sonic and Shadow fight the gun robots, capping it off of a recreation of the iconic SA2 battle pose, oh my god, it's everywhere! Shadow using Chaos Spears, he takes off his inhibitor rings, and the song that plays during his and Robotnik's sacrifice is a rendition of the Adventure 2 credits theme. Holy shit, this movie, dude! I am absolutely soying the f*** out right now, and honestly, you should be doing that as well, I think. Experience some goddamn whimsy with me right now, because this finale is incredible, and I hope Matt Walsh's pillow is warm on both sides tonight. Sonic 3 is a great movie, and a genuinely fantastic Sonic movie. Despite my small issues with the characterization, pacing, and what they did to Gerald, this is an awesome movie, and I will be rewatching it for years to come. And these movies still aren't done. Post-credits seemingly get Metal Sonic and Amy joining for the 4th movie, releasing in about 2 to 3 years from now. And you better believe I will be seated on day 1. Well, that's it, I guess. It's actually amazing how far these movies have come, to the point that we have a loose adaptation of Sonic Adventure 2 on the big screen, and it not only doesn't suck, but it's one of my favorite movies of the year. While the Sonic movies are definitely not perfect video game adaptations, they are still way more entertaining than they have any right to be. And now that they know how to lock in and deliver on the hype, I am immensely excited for what movie 4 has in store for us. It still feels surreal as a lifelong fan of this franchise, watching it finally be in a position where it's well received by critics and making a ton of money across the games, comics, and movies. Hell, even saying out loud that Sonic the Hedgehog has a well-received and financially successful film trilogy doesn't quite register with me. I'm too used to my boy being a punching bag. These movies have gone a long way when it comes to restoring goodwill to the brand and making it more popular than ever. It's crazy, and I will always have respect for Jeff Fowler for not only constantly listening to feedback, but for managing to make each installment better than the last. And while I have my doubts movie 4 will reach the stratospheric heights of movie 3, I can at least rest easy knowing that it will most likely be a fun and enjoyable time. I don't need these movies to set the world on fire every time, but man, the things that happen when they do. Thanks for watching. I feel like it's tone deaf to tell you to play Yakuza this time after all that, so play Sonic X Shadow Generations. It's really good, I promise.
With the palm tree.